Where was I? Oh, Marx came up with this. Well, now, let's take a look and see where that leads us. Because if we don't get the language right, we cannot communicate. You see, we communicate through words. Have you ever started, and all of you have done this, talking to somebody and you're trying to explain something to them? And you explain along, all of a sudden the guy shuts you off. And if you haven't been shut off, you haven't ever been talking to anybody. You better get out and do some work. Why do they shut you off? Generally, you'll find this is the case. Somewhere back in your process, you had a different meaning for a word than he had. And from that point on, you were going down two tracks and neither of you knew it. And all of a sudden the tracks got so far, all he could do was turn you off. He had no choice. For he could no longer logically follow. We have to be careful that the words we have, this is the biggest drive in this nation, is to confuse the language so people cannot even communicate one to another about what the causes of the problems we have are. As you will see, my definition for democracy will be quite different than the one given in the public schools today. And until we come to a common definition, we can't communicate. Now let's go and take a look at some words that the average person has got a little mixed up today. One, a Marxist. And when most of our government officials use the word peace, coexistence, aggression, they are meaning the Marxist definitions, not the traditional definitions. Let me give you those definitions so we can do our thinking when we're reading the newspaper. Oh, don't take notes. You lose your notes and where are you? Your brain is in the gutter somewhere. I never allow a student to take a note. If he isn't bright enough to listen, then he should be someplace else, I was telling the Westerfields my definition for a lecture. A lecture is a process of the notes of the professor become the notes of the student without going through the minds of either one. Anyway, you see this man here? This man's a bourgeois. I can tell that. You look bourgeois all over. But you see, I'm poor. I'm a proletariat. I'm a prole. You can tell that all over. Now, you see, we're good friends. We've known each other for years. I like you and you like me. We get along real fine. Except one thing. We have two different economic classes. Therefore, we're struggling. Oh, it may be latent. Maybe we don't know we're struggling, but there's a struggle there. You understand that, don't you? Now, as long as there's more than one economic class, there's struggle in society, isn't it? Now, you see, if you had you're a doctor, and you had a patient who had cancer. What is cancer? Well, it's foreign cells growing inside the body. They don't belong there, right? That interfere with the normal bodily functions. It would be humane for you to take a knife, even though it was very bloody and very painful, and cut that cancer out, wouldn't it? If the body's social has a cancer in it, individuals, elements, in which are contrary to the harmony of that body, as a surgeon, no matter how bloody and how painful it must be, this is what the Marxists say, we must cut that out. Now, if there's more than one economic class, we're going to have struggle and lack of social harmony. Therefore, in order to bring harmony to the social body, we must cut out the cause of struggle. And struggle is what? Different economic classes. The only way to end struggle is to have only one economic class. What class could we have? Well, the only class would be the working class. All other classes are parasites and couldn't survive on their own. Therefore, the working class is chosen for a pragmatic reason, not because they're any more noble or anything else, but because they're the only one that can survive. You understand that, don't you? Now, seeing you're not a member of the working class, as long as you're alive, there's struggle in society. There can't ever be true peace, can there? Now, you understand, friend, that this is a peaceful gun with a peaceful bullet. And I'm shooting you because I love mankind in society. You understand that? This is a peaceful act. Because by shooting you, struggle ceases between us. Now, of course, as you're laid out there, you become peaceful. Graveyards are very peaceful. There's very little struggle going on in graveyards, as I can observe. Now, if I did this out of hatred for you or greed because I wanted your money or something of this sort, if I did this for personal reasons, it would be a sin, immoral. But if I do it for mankind, then it's moral. Understand? Now, notice, if you don't like being shot and you try to resist my shooting you, you are the aggressor. For you're interfering with my peaceful act. You don't know what the term aggression means until you understand that aggression is interference with the peaceful act of a communist, of exterminating opposition to the working class. Now, until I shoot you, we coexist. Coexistence is only that time it takes me to shoot you. Once I've shot you, coexistence ends, and my goal as a Marxist is to end the coexistence by exterminating all opposition to communism, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, this isn't because I hate you, you understand? It's a necessity, a pragmatic necessity. And sure, we don't like all the bloodshed and all the beatings and all of the firing squads and all of the other things that we have to do, but it's just simply necessary to cut out this cancerous growth because you just do not blend into the working class. It's not your fault. We don't hold this personally against you. It's just a fact which we must recognize as an existence. All right? We've covered Marx. That's it. As absurd as it sounds, the youth are being fed that on our campuses in large, huge doses, and more than one dum-dum is buying it. It may sound absurd, but it's causing flames across this country. Well, anyway, let's go and take a look at the I have so many different things that I have to put in one place or another, and I don't know when to put them in. I want to warn you that this talk is not intended to be any thorough education. Well, people who keep trying to make it into such, and it isn't. What I'm intending to do is to give a wide overview. An overview I don't know anywhere else to get, really. We have so many excellent books and materials on single subjects, delving in depth. But we don't seem to have very much material which gives the broad picture, and I'm going to try to present that today as a skeleton on which you are obligated to put the meat. That is, by further investigation, and that's what the book tables and so forth are for in the back. Let's take a look I'll try to cover before our coffee break about 4 years of political science. And then after the coffee break and before lunch, we'll cover 11 years of economics. By the way, this is more political science and economics than you will get in 4 or 11 years at any of our major universities, I'll guarantee you. Up here on the political science, and we have a chart over there, and if a bulb hadn't burned out on the other one, we would have a chart on the other side, because these charts were drawn for audiences of no more than 200, and I believe we have about 800 or so in here, and it's just a little oversized for my charts. I can't get them in the airplane if I make them any bigger. That's my problem. I have to haul these things around, and they get heavy. You know, when you haul these things quite a ways, you realize how many miles I got on those things. Well, anyway, let's take a look at the top section there of political science. Over at the University of Michigan, they say that there are, in the political science department, 256 different forms of government. Now that must be the greatest absurdity ever perpetrated on any university campus, including the SDS. The fact, how could you even conceive of 256 different forms of government? I have 5 up there. Monarchy, mon meaning one, archy, rule by one. Ali means few, rule by a few. Demos merely means mob, ruled by the mob, but we'll use the liberal definition. I don't like to take unfair advantage. We'll use people rule. Okay, that's fine. Or majority rule. How's that? I love that. Rule by the majority. Republic. Rule by law. The government being ruled. Not the government ruling the people. but the government being ruled. And there's a total opposite between a democracy and a republic. They are total antithesis, one of the other. And anarchy, ruled by no one. None ruling. Now, there's another form of government possible to put up here. You see, can anybody think of any form of government beside ruled by one, ruled by a minority, ruled by majority, ruled by law, ruled by nobody?
Judges.
Pardon?
Judges.
Yes. Direct rule by the divine. That is, a thearchy. But there's a problem with a thearchy. That is, if God decides to set one up, there's nothing you and I can do to stop him. And if he decides not to set one up, there's nothing you and I can do to make him. Unless somebody in this room feels that they are God, and if they do stand up and we can all go home, there's no use us discussing thearchy in a course of political science. Well, let's take a look at these different forms of government. First, monarchy. I don't believe there's ever been one. A true rule by one, outside of a small tribe, a small patriarchal group. But in any society of any size, I think we'll find that every king had his dukes and his earls and his nobles, for whom and through whom he ruled. And really this clique ruled. And I think if we look at any dictator or any emperor, if we look at a Hitler, he had his Himmlers and his Goebbels and his Goerings, his Stalinides, his Brezhnesvs and his Khrushchevs and his Berias. Each of these people have their clique, which actually does the ruling, and that the so-called emperor or dictator or king really is the figurehead, the spokesman, the mouthpiece for the clique. But if the clique is ruling, the elite is ruling. And in reality, what we have is an oligarchy with a facade. And this is not a form of government. But oligarchy is the true form of government. I think we all understand what oligarchies are. Most people have always lived under oligarchies. Most nations have always had them. Certainly it is the predominant form of government in the history of mankind. The rule of the minority over the majority. And by different methods and under different names and forms. But still a rule of the clique, of the elite, of the aristocracy, of the nobility over the masses. Let's take a look at the other end, anarchy. There's never been an anarchical form of government. In order to have an anarchical form of government, there is no government at all. We'd have to have a society in which all people were honest, no one would cheat, no one would lie, no one would steal, no one would break their promise. There would be no serious disagreements. We'd all think and agree in all matters of importance. In addition to that, no one in the society would want power of any sort over anyone else in the society. For you see, if anybody wanted power over anyone else, he could take it in anarchical, and there would be no resistance unless the other citizens organized together to prevent him. If they organize to prevent him, they become a government, and you cease having anarchy. Anarchy is totally impossible, except when charlatans are selling it to num-nums. There are only two types of people in the world who ever advocate anarchy, that is, charlatans and num-nums trained by charlatans, doing the bidding of charlatans. No one could honestly actually believe that government ever withers away, or could wither away, or will ever wither away. No government ever has, and I'll guarantee you, no government made up of men is ever going to. We can be absolutely, totally certain of that. Not as long as this world is still spinning here. It's not going to happen with man on it. Anarchy is not possible as a form of government. But there's another definition of anarchy that we use generally in our lay language, and that is a condition where there's a breakdown of law and order, where there's chaos, where the government cannot or will not protect the citizens' lives and property. Notice as we had in Watts and Detroit and Newark, Chicago, is a breakdown of law and order because the government would not protect life and property. In Detroit, they ordered the policemen to leave the area and disarm themselves to allow these people to freely express their frustrations. Now, the mayor and the police department and so forth were hired for the purpose of defending and protecting the lives and the properties of the citizens of the city of Detroit. Wasn't that what their job? Isn't that what they're paid for? Isn't that what they're elected for? Yet they refused to do their duty. which was to defend the property and the lives of the citizens. Now, how did Adolf Hitler get elected to Chancellor of the Reichstag in a free and open democratic election? Was it the fact that German people didn't know what Hitler was up to? Oh, they had Mein Kampf, they knew. Was it the fact that German people were more immoral than other nations? I doubt that. Less educated? Not true. Lower economic development? Again, not true. Why did the people of Germany elect Adolf Hitler Chancellor of the Reichstag? Well, I'll tell you, there's some strong indication that a few things had influence on it. One, 500,000 marching in front of the Reichstag. Riots in the major cities all across Germany. As many as 100,000 a night being hauled into the streets and beaten by people in uniform. You see, when a hoodlum by himself goes in and terrorizes some people, the people may call the police. But when the hoodlums put on uniforms, the brown shirts of the Hitler Youth or of the Nazi Party, the people individually are terrified and refuse to even call for help and submit to the terror because they're in uniform. Notice the same terror, the same Nazi tactics being used in our Negro communities in the United States. The terrorists, the hoodlums, now put on uniforms. So when they go, like in Detroit, into the apartment buildings to extract their tax for the Negro, for the Republic of New Africa, and kick in the doors and take the television sets and take the property of the Negro citizens, the citizens, because they're in uniforms, are afraid to call the police. And so what you have is the mafia in operation of total control of terror ruling in the Negro communities in the major cities today. The Negro citizen is without protection. The government will not give it to him. The white citizen is so terrified of the Negro community because it's been built up in the press and everything else that he will not and doesn't understand the problem, and the Negro now is left to the mercy of the criminal element. And if you want to know where the Panthers recruit, where the Muslims recruit, they recruit at San Quentin, at Jackson Prison, at Sing Sing. These are the recruiting grounds. They recruit in the prisons. For it's the criminal element that they want in order to terrorize by. Very rare to find one of these boys without a prison record. That's where now they can steal and get away with it because they have a union of thieves. All you do now is, instead of having gone out and stealing individually and taking the risk, now you get a strong enough union of thieves, just like any other union of thieves, coming in different forms and in different elements of society. I was going to insult another group right then, and I thought I'd better drop until later. I got them this afternoon, and they might feel that they were unduly being worked over. So we'll leave them out today, right now. You can get away with it. You see, when the brown shirts, when the Nazi stormtroopers put on the swastikas and on their leather bands and their brown shirts, now the individual disorganized citizen did not dare resist. And so you had the mass beatings, the marches, the demonstrations, the chaos, the breakdown of law and order. Now what happened? All of the candidates at election time promised what? Like all candidates do at the time. Law and order, don't they? One man was promising law and order. His name was Adolf Hitler. He called his promise Der New Order. Isn't that what he promised? Order. And the German people elected him. Why? They knew he could keep his promise. Why? It was his brown shirts doing the beating. The only guy you can trust to keep his promise is the guy leading the riots. The only man who can turn off the riots is the riot leader. If the government could, they would have. And they haven't. So you don't believe anybody in government. You've got to believe who? The riot leader. My point is this. There has never been a riot in the history of mankind that the real organizers of that riot were not trying to seek dictatorial political power. You make a riot, I don't care who it is, what it is, or where it is, the leaders of that riot are trying to seize dictatorial political power. The use of anarchy as a method to coming to power can only lead to that course. For look at it, if a majority were on their side, they wouldn't use anarchy as a method to come into power. Anarchy is only used as a method of cover power where a small minority are trying to take over and rule the majority. The result of successful anarchy is always a police state. Whether it be in Russia, Germany, Italy, or the United States. If government is decided by riot, if events are decided by violence in the streets, a police state, an autocratic, violent dictatorship, a ruthless dictatorship is inevitable. For the people will demand it. What is the purpose of the riots in the street? To get the American people, as the German people did, to demand law and order. Ask yourself a question. Is there more law and order in Russia or in the United States? In Russia, it's loaded with law and order. There are 2 million members of the NKVD to help assure law and order. They have vast prison compounds, which are very peaceful. Is there more peace at San Quentin or in Watts? San Quentin is loaded with peace and law and order. You see, only one side have got the guns. That assures peace, doesn't it? Notice when they take away all the guns of the people in the United States, you will have peace, and you will have law and order. Hitler gave peace and law and order. And if that's what you're looking for, you're going to get it. For what they want you to do is demand law and order. Not liberty, law and order. The end of violence. And there's only one way you're going to get that end of violence if that's what you're looking for. That is, by putting the promoters of that violence in power. Then they'll end violence. They'll take the num-nums in the street like the Bolsheviks. 85% of all the Bolsheviks fighting for Lenin died in front of Bolshevik firing squads. All of the rioters, as soon as these people come to power, they get lined up. You don't want rioters around once you're in power. You use rioters to get the power. Once you get the power, you take care of them. Read Machiavelli. 400 years ago, he's telling you, if you come to power by revolution, exterminate the army that brought you to power. They're in discontents. They're malcontents, aren't they? They're great to come to power with, but you don't want those people around once you're in power. You take the forces you just defeated as yours. They're loyalists. And destroy the army that brought you to power, the revolutionaries. All the revolutionaries fighting for the left are to die in front of firing squads of the left. Castro, who was he blasting in front of his firing squads after a successful revolution? Those people who brought him to power. Those are the people with the talent and the training and the motivation to overthrow Castro. He doesn't want those boys around. Those are the first to get it. And anybody who isn't a student of history is condemned to repeat it. You know, you're going to get it. Anyway, if that's any consolation to you, it would be a kind of a morbid consolation. So let's go back and look at anarchy here and kind of wrap this up. Anarchy is not a form of government. It never has been. But it has been used in perpetrating certain types of crimes. Aaron Burr, the man who shot Alexander Hamilton, was an outspoken anarchist. Or at least his profession was that he believed in anarchy as a form of government. Somebody had sold him that bill of goods somewhere. Probably some leftist college operation somewhere in England. But the Fabians weren't around then, were they? Well, there was another man, John Wilkes Booth, an outspoken anarchist and a Marxist. So was Leon Calzez, a native Detroiter, who shot down President McKinley at the turn of the century. So was Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan Sirhan. Marxist anarchists who believed in the fading away of government. Now they were, of course, num-nums, but they were being directed by some very crafty people who were able to use this indoctrination to make these willing tools of extermination. So let's see if we can wrap up anarchy by this. It's not a form of government. It is a transition from one form to an oligarchy. The result of successful anarchy, or anarchist movement, is oligarchy. The rule by a clique, by an elite, under some name. And by the way, you'll find it generally the same clique as before. Most cliques who are going to go overthrow the existing cliques, the real people behind the clique is the clique that's in existence. Notice who finances the money for the riots and revolutions in the United States. The Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. They finance the schools. They finance with the most liberal lines. They finance the peace marches and the civil rights marches. For example, in Detroit, Michigan, the riots were conducted by an organization called Cleveland Corps. This is what's the organization that sent the cadre, the trainees up in their cars, the people from Cleveland Corps, and to the salesmen that went around promoting the riots and etc. This is very well documented. There's no question about it. My own personal eyewitness, because you see, I worked in the Negro communities for years, and you watched all of these cars. Talk to people. What are all these guys? All in the same suit: black suit, white shirt, black tie, white hat, black band, black, well dressed, nattily dressed. 6 in a car, all Ohio license plates, going down through every community, dropping them out, working every door, getting a preparation for the riot. Now, who would finance Cleveland Corps? Well, in June 1967, remember the riot was in July, the Ford Foundation announced a $265,000 grant to Cleveland Corps. Later in June, they gave another $165,000 to Cleveland Corps. On Tuesday of the riot week, while Detroit was in flames and been in 3 days in flames, the Ford Foundation announced an emergency cash grant of $45,000 to Cleveland Corps. All right? Well, we know this. Anybody who's been a student knows where the money comes from. I don't want to get ahead with the Ford Foundation. I got a lot to say about them later. So anyway, anarchy is used as an intimidation of a population to succumb to rule by a clique. People want law and order. Now, what you know about any society, I don't care what it is, if you have sufficient breakdown of law and order in any society, that society will demand law and order before anything else. Hitler knew that. Lenin knew that when he had 5 years of terror and starvation and chaos in Russia to bring the Russian people totally to their knees in 1922. To where he knew in Russia, because of the total chaos, and the communists promoted all sides of the conflict for those 5 years to make sure that railroads did not run, that food could not be grown, that there would be mass starvation, and that for people to stay alive they had to kill and eat their own children.